What is happening, guys? Welcome back to Rock Guitar School. So, Van Halen drama, does it ever end? It's just really sad with these guys. You know, normally, if you follow this channel, normally I don't cover this kind of stuff, but I think it's just ridiculous. You know, I started reading about this a couple of weeks ago where basically David Lee Roth, you know, there's a reason why you don't see a different kind of truth on like any of the streaming platforms. Basically what you have to do is you have to order the CD. I don't even know if you can even, if it might be available. I haven't checked Amazon, but as far as I know, like that album, you know, basically the reunited Van Halen without Michael Anthony, different kind of truth. I believe it came out 2000, was it 2012-ish, something like that, 2011. So the album that basically reunited David Lee Roth, and you know they started touring in the 2000s with David Lee Roth again. And so basically, I mean, how this whole thing came about, I mean, how they even got back together was because of Wolfgang Van Halen. You know, he kind of initiated the whole thing. And, you know, it wasn't really Eddie, it wasn't really Alex Van Halen, but, you know, it was Wolfgang that actually made the call to David Lee Roth to, you know, see if they could all get together. And that's how all that happened. So to kind of see all this stuff go down is kind of just wacky to me. That album that they did basically was, you know, again, with Wolfgang Van Halen. He was the one that put all that stuff together. The studio, they started at Henson Studios. The reason why they ended up there was because of David Lee Roth. They, you know, and that's the thing. So, like, it sounded like they were basically not recording at 5150. You know, it's kind of like, all right, like, Wolfgang is working, managing the band. David Lee Roth is kind of like almost at the helm again, you know. We're going to record at his preference, Henson Studios, and we're going to make this album. So, you know, Eddie had to re-record his whole guitar, all his guitar parts. I believe not just I think it was just I think it was everything. Like his guitar ended up sounding really weird. I think because they ended up using like these old machines, so it just wasn't coming across properly. So I believe like he had to re-record everything at 5150, like all his guitars. So it's like this whole thing. So, you know, like I said a couple of weeks ago when I started reading, you know, about, you know, why, you know, Wolfgang said in an interview, you know, the interviewer asked, why isn't this out? You know, why can't you find it? And so response was basically, it's basically in David Lee Roth's hands. You know, he's the one that's not approving this stuff. And so you can see what has happened here. This is kind of, you know, rolled on through to kind of some words going back and forth. I mean, the main thing that upsets me is like, you know, like I said, you know, in the beginning of the video, I don't really get into this Van Halen stuff because it's just been forever. You know, if you follow the band throughout, it's like never ending. But it's a shame that that album is not on. Like I listen to Spotify. I like Spotify, so that's usually, you know, how I consume music. And it's a shame that that album is not on there. It's a really great album. I love it. And I'm sure, you know, a lot of you guys love that album too. And it's just like, you know, why wouldn't they have that on there? So I've come to find out that this is basically because David Lee Roth won't sign off on it. You know, it's just ridiculous. And so it goes down the line. And then, you know, of course, you can see what happened. David Lee Roth, you know, caught wind of this, and then he responds with this video, this effing kid, right? And so you can pull it up yourself, guys. I watched it, this whole thing with the accountants and then Wolfgang. It just sounded like some pranks going on. But, you know, David Lee Roth turned it into this whole drama thing with, you know, the accountants having the checks for the band and the crew, and, you know, apparently Wolfgang had these ladies kicked out of the venue, but they were carrying checks for the crew and all this stuff. So, you know, in this article, this is Rolling Stone here. You know, Wolfgang Van Halen responds to David Lee Roth's "This effing kid" video born into this Van Halen drama. So the quote is, I guess now that my dad isn't here to be a target, I guess he went to the next best thing. Bassist says a former bandmate, right? So there he is. 6 weeks after David Lee Roth released a profanity-laced video that targeted and teased Wolfgang Van Halen, the Mammoth WVH rocker has finally responded to his former bandmates this effing kid clip, right? So again, you can go check it out. I'm not gonna really go into some of this stuff. You know, you can kind of see some of the stuff that was said, and I think it's just a bunch of nonsense. You know, it's like take a joke, and that's the thing. It's like, again, you know, Roth is just, in recent years, I've got to be honest, guys, I've become more of a Sammy Hagar fan than Roth. I really like the era with Sammy Hagar. I like, you know, all those songs that they produced with him. I think they're just, it's a different era of Van Halen, right? You can't beat that early era of Van Halen. The rawness, I mean, Roth's stage presence, like the whole nine. You know, the way that there wouldn't be any Van Halen. Like, we wouldn't even know. Like, if that initial era of Van Halen didn't happen, like, that's the thing. They worked together. So Eddie Van Halen, David Lee Roth, they were just yin and yang. So, like, they just worked together. It's just like two samurais, you know? And it was just an incredible band, the way they all interlocked together. Michael Anthony and now Alex Van Halen. So, looking at some of the stuff in this article, this is one of the things that caught me, you know? Wolfgang says, I guess you have to take what he says with a grain of salt, considering he also said that he wrote Eruption and came up with the Frankenstein guitar pattern. He said he wrote all the solos that Dad wrote. So, this is, you know, if you caught David Lee Roth on Joe Rogan, I can kind of see, like, where he's coming from with that comment. Like, he was explaining, you know, this is what I know. I don't know, maybe he said, David Lee Roth has said other things in the past, but this is a clip of David Lee Roth basically explaining the process of how Eddie, back then, you know, was constructing these solos.
Bird, that guitar, which is one of the greatest solos in the history of all music.
Well, there's some. When we moved to more channels, you had to really walk in with your solo written, track 2, and they just make it up as they go. And then when it's time to mix, they'll put a little of track 2 and a little of track 6 in a way that you would never think play the guitar. For example, Ed started doing that on a couple of tracks. Original solos, Running with the Devil, okay, these are thematic solos. When it started going like this, he'd record 6 different versions of the solos and then just start, move the channel, like here, turn this one on, turn this one off, turn this one on, turn this one. And then he'd have to go learn the solo.
Wow.
So you'll see his hand move from down here to up here and down there. It became a gymnastic effort, more elbow and shoulder.
All right, so, you know, it's interesting to hear, you know, I'm always interested to hear, you know, how they made that music back in the day. You know, there was no Pro Tools, you know, everything was cut. You know, if they needed to, you know, make an edit, they literally had to hand cut the physical tape. And that's the thing, to produce some of this stuff live, so like off the cuff, it's crazy to hear how they constructed, you know, again, like these, you know, no Pro Tools. So Eddie's solos, I can't find this quote where maybe where Wolfgang was claiming David Lee Roth wrote the solos. I think this is what he's probably referring to, where he was talking about how they constructed these solos, and it seems like David Lee Roth helped along that process. You know, I remember reading recently of how you know, Neil Schon with Steve Perry, how Steve Perry would influence Neil Schon, you know, of Journey. So, like, a lot of the solos that he was making back in the day, you know, have those, you can hear those melodies. You can hear that kind of, you know, the harmonies, whatever, like in those songs. And you can kind of say, like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, they're amazing guitar players, but, like, catching those melodies, like, years later, you know, we didn't really know this at the time, but, you know, they were all working as a band back then. So this is how, you know, how they were doing things back then. And this is another interview here. Let's see here. You know, Wolfgang says, you know, I think drama just isn't worth it. And if you could just get together and have a good time with your friends and make some music, I think that's all that really matters. And that's the thing, like, what it comes down to, I think, I mean, if you listen to Mammoth WVH now, you look at Wolfgang's band, just, those guys seem to be having the best time together. You know, Wolfgang, you know, he's got the best setup. He makes the albums himself. You know, he doesn't have to deal with all that garbage in the studio with other band members and all that stuff. Makes the music himself, and then, you know, has his own band recreate. Just saw another interview with him recently where he was talking about, you know, he lets the band kind of play, I think it was for Drumeo, you know, they just released a new video with him playing all the drum parts. It was really cool to watch. You guys can check that out if you want. He goes on to say where, you know, he kind of lets the band play like them. You know, he's not so constrained to where, like, you have to play this part exactly how I played it, and lets them be themselves, you know, which is really cool. And that's the thing. Back in the day, all these bands were so, they were you know, ran with iron fists, and David Lee Roth was, I think he was the captain of that ship back in the day. And I think coming back, you know, yeah, he probably wanted to be the captain again, and maybe he was, but it seemed like Wolfgang was really running the show. You know, I think I'm going to end it at that, guys. You know, this video is going on a little long, but it's just, I think my main point here is, like, they need to get that album back on Spotify. You know, Different Kind of Truth. It's a great album. I hope they patch things up, but there's just always drama with that band. It just never ends. So, guys, have a great day and rock on.